So let us, now that we have the window and we know the block that we're here for, just take a look around and see what's in your space. And bring your gaze in and notice what's on your desk. And just observe if you have things piled up, or if you're not at your desk and you have many books or papers piled up. And notice what happens to your breathing when you look around and how you feel in your space. And now notice the points that you're contacted to your space. So what are you sitting on and how does that feel against you? Are you at a standing desk? Are you on the couch? Are you using an office chair? Just notice the points that you contacted to your environment. Feel your back against the seat or against the pillow. Notice if there's a light breeze moving across your face. Feel how it feels to be supported in your seat, by your seat. And if it's going to allow you to be more present, you might want to switch your camera off. And take a sigh. Just breathe in and allow the breath to leave you. And another deep breath in and sigh out. And feel how that feels in your body. And observe what that does to the thoughts, the odd one or two that might be chasing themselves across your mind. I like to do what dancers say is sitting on your sit bones. And what that means is you take your hands, this is a personal exercise, your hands, your butt. So you scoot your right cheek out from under you with your right hand and your left cheek out from under you. And you notice now that you're actually sitting more of the bones. And feel what that does when you balance your weight in that way. Allow your head to float up. Allow your shoulders to relax. And give yourself some more space across your chest and down your body to breathe. We often overlook how amazing we are as designed creatures. Our lungs go from way up top at our necks to way down at the bottom of our ribs and all around to the back of us. And what you can do is put both hands on your back and just let your hands be on your back. And take a couple of breaths there. And just feel how it feels when you consider that breath is going all that way around to the back of you also. Now, if you're resourced enough, you can let your eyes drift closed. Or if it's more comfortable, just soften your gaze so that you're not focused on anything in particular. Let your palms be open and allow your body to be. It's doing what you're doing, what it's doing, and just notice. Allow the breath to come in and out of the nose. And breathe gently. And as you bring your awareness to your breath, we will begin to make the in-breath and the out-breath even. In some traditions, this is called the perfect breath. We begin to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Continue with that rhythm and feel what that feels like in your body. Just notice it. If that feels hard, go to in to 3 and out to 3. And if it's okay, you can try in to 5 and out to 5. And we just breathe together there. I have an eye on the time. Just breathe. And we release the breath to its own rhythm. And again, notice. And see if there's any tingling or if your hands and feet are a different temperature. Just observe what changing the pattern of your breath does with the rest of the system that's your body. And take another big breath in and sigh out. Another breath in and sigh out. The final pattern we'll play with is even breaths, and we just take a couple of these here. Alternate nostril breaths, just a couple of these. And you're going to need your thumb and your ring finger. Thumb and annular. So press your thumb, breathe out, breathe in, switch, press with the ring finger, breathe out, breathe in, switch, press with the thumb, out and in, switch. That's it. Just a couple more. See how that feels. And we come back to the room together. A big juicy breath in and release. Just take a moment to come back, to feel your seat, to be present with everyone. And we are here, we are ready. We have both hemispheres of the brain balanced. And I hand over to Margaret, who will introduce Dr. Noel. And let's dive into today's masterclass. Thank you so much.
So without further ado, I feel very, very privileged to be able to introduce Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel. Leslie, are you here? I'm not seeing you on my screen, but we'll see. To you all, some of you may have experienced her at the summit, and at which time we got a lot of incredible reviews for the work that she's doing and the way in which she's attempting to do it. And Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel is an associate professor at North Carolina University. And I found out this morning, just this morning, speaks fluent Portuguese and has lived in Brazil for many years and has been a professor in many different universities in different specializations. So Leslie has a BA in industrial design, and she has an MBA, and then she got her PhD from North Carolina State University in design. And in this field, Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel has been part of a lot of pioneering work, has been integrating emancipatory, critical, and anti-hegemonic lenses, focusing on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. And in this masterclass, what we are going to learn, what we're trying to explore together, is how, when we are thinking about the change we want to create in the world, how can we embody these lenses, an emancipatory, critical, and anti-hegemonic lens, focusing on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. Dr. Lesley Noel has also created the Designer's Critical Alphabet, which is a very unique tool, a groundbreaking tool that is being used all over the US, and maybe Leslie could tell us where else it's being used. But yeah, I think we're very privileged to have Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel to lead us in this masterclass today. And I'm particularly excited about her because she's part of a lineup of three that we've had last month, this month, and next month, all amazing women from Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from. We had Chrislyn Moore last month. We have Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel this month, and we also have later this month, Alyssa Rostand, who is going to give you the art and science of breathwork and how you can use it, to enhance your leadership and for better self-governance. So, that's going to be exciting. But yeah, without further ado, let me hand you over to Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel, who I'm not seeing.
You're not seeing me?
Oh, yeah, I see you now.
Okay, all right.
Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen. This is going to take like 2 seconds because I share my screen in a particular way that allows me to see notes. So let's see. All right, you should be seeing my screen now. Great. So today's format, yes, I have a presentation and I have a whiteboard in the background waiting, a virtual whiteboard. So we're gonna mix between the presentation and the activities to get through this conversation about co-creation, equity, and futures. And it's going to be an informal format. Let me open my chat so that I can see if people want to put anything in the chat. I'm seeing some people's faces. I don't see all. Actually, I'm going to organize it so I could see everyone as well. And so just feel free to ask questions, interrupt. I'm going to try to get you to talk a little bit. I have a lot of slides, but I don't want it to be like me just talking at you. And then I have some activities which are almost like games because the way that I include a lot of play in the way that I do design. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the little kinds of experiments that I might do, or not experiments, activities that I might do with people to get them to talk about equity in the future and co-creation, right? So Toni Morrison gave us this wonderful quote: all utopias are described by people who are not allowed in. And I see this as a kind of design quote, you know, like it's people who are left out who create the worlds that we need, right? And then there's another author who I'm reading right now. There's an image of their book later on, Sasha Costanza Chuck, and their book is called Design Justice. I don't have the exact quote, but somewhere in the quote, Sasha says that transformation happens at the margins. You know, again, it's people who are left out, people who are at the margins, people who are just, who are not well served. They are the people who make change. Okay, so these are things that I think are important for us to remember. I'm going to call everyone here a designer, right? So, you know, as designers, people who are creating new futures, it's important for us to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that we have people who might be left out involved in the conversations, right? So the name of the talk, or the name of the session, gives you a little bit of an insight into where the conversation is going to go. It's about co-creation, it's about equity, it's about futures. And I've been then trying to operate in, math was not my thing, but I mean, Venn diagrams are cool. So I've been trying to operate at all times at the intersection of these three sections. So then I'm dividing up the conversation part of it into a focus on each section. And then in the activities, you'll probably see, hopefully you'll see some of the intersections, right? So let's start off talking about co-creation, which is design. So co-creation or co-design, there are a lot of words for this: co-creation, co-design, participatory design. And co-design brings the beneficiaries of social innovation into the process of solving their own problems. I pulled this directly from this textbook, and I put the image of the book up. So co-design and social innovation. You know, traditionally designers were taught to kind of be like these experts. You know, we all wanted to be like, I'll call a name that some of you might not know, but Philippe Starck, who is a designer, he is a French designer, and we were all kind of, we had that image in our heads. We were going to be like Philippe Starck, or, you know, that kind of rock star designer who was going to do amazing work and everyone would remember their name. And co-designers, you know, this is like a newer design movement. A lot of designers from today are being educated in a different way, which is good, where they are trying to figure out how we're going to create more participatory processes that are compatible with activism and social justice. Some of the 4 key principles of co-design: sharing power, prioritizing relationships, using participatory means, and building capability. You know, I worked on a design project in maybe the late 2000s. And it was a design project paid for by an international development agency. And so I was this designer who would be flown in to a place, design something and leave. And I was so bothered by the process, you know, that on one of the projects, I started to change the terms of reference and say, well, okay, can I just teach design instead? And, you know, instead of me designing, can we then teach design? So that's kind of like, that's one of the aims. I'm happy to see this now as one of the aims of co-design, that you have to build capacity in the context that you're working, right? And then actually, it's not stated here, very often you have to learn to recognize that the capacity already exists, and have to become a little bit more humble and see, well, okay, people already have this design ability, which can put you into a kind of existential crisis, because you're like, okay, so what am I doing if people are already here designing stuff? But then our roles start to change as designers working in this kind of co-design process. So co-design, there's another definition from another book. Co-design is an approach to designing with, not designing for people. It typically works best where people with lived experience, communities and professionals work together to improve something they all care about. And the primary role of co-design is elevating voices and contributions of people with lived experience. So that gives us a new role then as designers, where we are amplifying other people's work rather than doing things for people. Co-design is about building relationships. It requires significant investment in building trust. And that trust usually starts, this is from the previous author, Kellyanne McKercher, that trust usually starts between the support team and co-designers over cups of tea and through conversations. Co-design is a very slow process, and I'm trying to remember, one of our participants just had a cup of, had a sip of maybe tea. So maybe we are in a co-design process here and having tea together. And sometimes that is then something we have to unlearn. How are we going to slow down the work that we do to honor that relationship building process? All right, and so this is a slide from one of my classes with students where, very often in design, we focus on other skills, like technical skills. Can you draw? Can you do this? Can you do research and all this stuff? And, I very often have to introduce this slide about other skills, empathetic relationship building skills, where I'm asking students, have you learned to look, to listen, to respect, to negotiate power with people, to share power, support people? Because in this kind of community engaged design practice, you're not just a designer, and often you end up holding many other roles, activist, listener, maybe even counselor, many other roles that we end up taking on that require slightly different skills, right? All right, so it seems like I've reached the last co-design slide. Not it seems like, I have reached the last co-design slide. How are people feeling about co-design? Does it sound like something that you're already doing with other people? Yes, why can't I see people's names? I was seeing their names before. Okay, so I saw you nodding. Julia, yes, I saw you nodding. You're doing co-design with people. How are you doing co-design with people in your legal practice?
Well, when I'm teaching, I teach criminology and law, and I used to be a therapist in the NHS. So before we even set off on any work at all, we set ground rules and boundaries, and I get people to tell me about what they're good at and what they like doing, who they are, and remind them that they're the biggest resource that we have in class. Actually, I'm not the resource, I'm just a facilitator, and they are relating to one another and sharing information. And so each class is different. If I'm teaching 4 classes, each one of them has a different atmosphere, but they generate magnificent knowledge and fresh outcomes because the students are bringing in their own personal experience. Somebody's from a council estate in London, somebody else is from a part of America, somebody else is from China. So we're kind of creating 10 weeks of artwork in criminology, law, the methods that they use, their interests. So, for example, we talk about the police quite a lot, and obviously for lots of reasons, which I don't want to go into right now, a lot of us don't trust the police at all. So they were asking me about mobile phones and the rights and laws of mobile phones in England, and they designed this research that they wanted to do to find out about the what police can do about you filming them on a mobile phone. So that was a great example. I like that. But anyway, that was better than I could ever have thought of.
So that actually is, I don't know if you all know Paulo Freire. Okay, I saw Julia saying yes. And so that is using a critical pedagogy approach to your class, Julia, where, so co-design is a little bit like that, where so in critical pedagogy, the teacher isn't the person with the knowledge, in quotes. It's everybody has the knowledge, and we're all bringing this knowledge together to mix it all together, and everyone is learning. So the teacher's learning, the students is learning. And so co-design is a little bit like that process, right? Where it's not the designer, in quotes, or the expert, in quotes, who has the knowledge and the expertise. There are many different types of expertise within the group of people who are working together. And it's that mix of expertise that creates something great at the end, And in using these more collaborative processes, I've started to learn new words, which maybe some of you know already, like learned experience versus lived experience. So very often I will go into a context and I actually have learned experience because I learned something in a classroom, but other people, the people in the community that I'm working in, have lived experience because they understand the phenomenon from a different place, And so in this co-design process, we are learning to honor, we are honoring everybody's role in the relationship. And maybe rotating roles a little bit. It's like a very I don't know how to describe it, but I've had very positive experiences in working this way. And there have been questions, by other people who I work with in my field, where they're like, okay, so you've given up your expertise in this. How are you giving these people so much power? And sometimes there are questions about the results. If you are going to use this kind of co-design process as a lawyer, another lawyer who is not interested in that kind of philosophy might be saying, well, what's the validity of the result of the process? And co-design is very much about the process rather than the results, so that's something that we keep in mind. The results are important, but the entire process is important, to get community buy-in and to, again, build capacity among the participants that you're working with, etc. Anyone else wants to give a perspective on, so I'm calling this co-design, but maybe some of you might be using this kind of perspective in the way that you practice law, or you could see the application of this in the work that you're doing. Anyone wants to share another perspective before I go back into the presentation? Yes, Alyssa.
Yeah, I've seen this beautiful thing happening when I was part of the team that built the New Fire Festival. And I mean, we literally built a physical village out in forest, and translating the Trinidadian, out in a forest. So like a European festival, except it wasn't usual in the Trinidadian context of where we're accustomed with urban festivals. So facilitating that and building some groundwork and leaving space for people to do things that they themselves might not have even considered doing, and the experience of which you could see lit them up was an amazing thing.
Yeah. I'm thinking, okay, so I'm thinking of a comment and I'm trying to think how what you said just put a comment in my head, but I'm trying to think what is the actual relationship. In the co-design process, sometimes what I will do to make the process move forward is I will bring a sacrificial idea to the process, right? Where, because I want people to contribute, but sometimes you need a starting point, right? So I will bring an idea and say, well, okay, let's I want you to be critical of this idea and pull it apart and see, well, how does this idea actually work in this context? And that's sometimes when the co-design process happens, when people are saying, you know, this absolutely can't work here, but if you did this and you did that and you did that and you did, then we'll get something that works, right? And I think, Julia, you were talking about working with the police. I did that kind of activity once on a project where we were trying to reimagine policing. That's a kind of question that's happening everywhere. And we were actually designing the workshop about policing, but I came to the workshop. I came to the design meeting then with an idea of how the workshop could have been, and then put it out to people and said, well, okay, what do we do? And, you know, so as the designer now, I had to kind of toughen up my shoulders because I had to now receive, well, they weren't actually even giving me feedback. They were just improving the design. But, you know, it can be hard on your ego when you do this kind of process, you know, and then, so it's another skill that you need as a co-designer to just learn to let go, right? And I think I've reached that place now. So, you know, I let go and then let people pull the thing apart and add and take away and, you know, move forward in the process, you know, and then we ended up with something that felt where everybody felt that they had a little part of it, right? I'm going to give you a little quote that I got from a child who I did this co-design work with a couple of years ago. I was working with a class in Trinidad. I'll refer to this class a few times probably during this talk, but I was working with children in Trinidad over 3 weeks. And when I started off, the teacher warned me about one student and said, well, this is going to be your troublemaker and he's disruptive in class and all of that stuff, right? And so what would happen, we would work together, and at the end of each week, we would have a focus group where the children would give their feedback on the process. So they just talk about the week, right? And then one week, this child said to me, you know, in this design process, nobody can laugh at your ideas, right? And so I'm like, okay, what do you mean nobody can laugh at your ideas? And he says, well, nobody can actually laugh at your ideas because the ideas actually belong to everybody, you know? So you maybe put an idea out there, but the fact is everybody gave you so much feedback that the idea belongs to everybody. So they can't really like laugh at you. I mean, they can laugh, but they're not laughing at you. And so, you know, it's just everybody's thing. It's everybody's thing together. And so after, you know, I didn't spend more than 3 weeks with these children, but I thought, well, okay, maybe this is why this child was so disruptive before, that they really were kind of didn't have the confidence to then be involved in the process before, you know, or they had their own insecurities and that's why they were disruptive. And then now in this co-design process, in this co-education process, they were able to feel a little bit more secure and know that people wouldn't laugh at them, and then they could participate much more fully, right? Maybe an irrelevant kind of anecdote, and I have way too many stories to share with you all. And so maybe you'll get some of these stories and you'll be like, okay, what is the relevance of this? But I think that is like part of why I enjoy this process so much, you know, just seeing how people move from being passive to active in a process. Some of you might know the term ladder of citizen participation. That's a term by Sherry Arnstein, I think. And so I think in the co-design process, I think of that, you know, the thing of the ladder of citizen participation is the idea of how we're going to get people to move up the ladder of citizen participation. And I feel like design, collaboration, you know, these kinds of very interactive activities are ways to get people to be less passive and more active in the things that they do. Anybody else want to share another gem of wisdom before I go back into the presentation, or shall I continue moving forward?
Sorry,
Dan, yes.
Yeah, what I noticed when I was working as a caseworker, practicing law as a caseworker, which was quite empowering for the client, is the process of witness statements, which many of you will be familiar with. But it's also that the client actually becomes an expert in their own experience, and their lived experience often trumps the learned experience, as you nicely phrased it, and the terminology you used of the lawyers on our side, but also on the Home Office's side. So to give an example, the Home Office, they'll have country policy and information note for each country on whether it's safe to return there. For example, for Mogadishu in Somalia, they're saying if you're from a certain minority clan, let's use the example of a client I had, the Ashraf clan, it's safe to return there. Whereas my client's lived experience is quite the opposite to that. So he'll present that as his lived experience, and that will be the first step in his evidence to inform the expert, who will then hopefully substantiate that. And in my practice, we've been able to get them, successful refugee status, which goes against, the policy, because the policy is saying it's safe for them to return. But actually their lived experience and the evidence, which may come from their family. So then you're interacting with more actors, which isn't just the client, it's actually their support network as well. They can show that they've had further family members which have died as a result of being in Mogadishu from that minority clan. The expert substantiates that, and then that goes against the rhetoric of the Home Office. It's an incredibly empowering situation for the client, and it all happens because of their learned experience in the first place, because they're their own mouthpiece, but then you sort of compound that with your own legal practice, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, and it's about shifting power and having people participate. And so I think that might take us into the second little segment. Let's see. All right, so that was the last slide of this segment. Okay, so now we're going to move into equity, which you all probably know better than I do. So I'm going to bring in some language that we use in design about equity, and then I'm going to want you all to, because I want to learn from you all. I'm using you all a lot because I live in the South in the US. In Trinidad, we would say all ya. I don't know what people say in other parts of the world, right? But it's a collective you, right? So you all. So what is equity? Oh my goodness, I'm a little afraid to show some stuff when you all are the experts in equity and equality and stuff like that. So equity, according to my unnamed source here, I think I have a source on the next slide. Equity involves trying to understand and give people what they need to enjoy full and healthy lives. And let's see, the next slide though adds equality. It says equality in contrast aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to enjoy full and healthy lives. So are you all seeing a difference between the two terms, equity and equality? Julia.
I remember seeing this as a cartoon the first time I saw this difference, and it was really interesting because, equality is the pension age in England, where it suddenly becomes 66, but actually most people from my community are dead by the time they get to 66. They ain't going to see 66 for sure, right? I'm 61. So equality is move the pension age up to 66 and then wait for the people from working class or manual labor men just die. That's not actually any version of equality. What I want is equity, where people actually have a chance to live lives and get a pension for a reasonable amount of time. Like in many communities, people never make it to that age. People who've been in prison, for example, tending to die in their 50s. They're not going to make it to pension age when they get out.
Wow, that is an example that I have never, ever thought of. But that is, that's a good example. And the cartoon that you're talking about is coming up. It's in the slides, right? And so, you know, like in my design classes, I've been doing a lot of design work with government agencies. And this is something that we have to talk about a lot, because most of us are trained to think about equality. And then certainly here in the US, equity, maybe not quite with this language, but when we talk about equity issues, people start to kind of get upset and push back and say, but we want to treat people the same, you know, and equality then is really about treating people like the same. And so a simple way I've been, and I'm not the only person, I'm drawing this from other people, right? So equality is about inputs and equity is about outcomes, you know, and a lot of us are trained to think about, okay, are we giving people equal inputs? But actually the question should be, are we creating equal outcomes? And so this now, Margaret, I see the question in your head. This brings us then to the cartoon, right? The cartoon that people know is the one on, the one on the right is a version of it. They're like some steps in between. I went back and I found the one on the left is actually the original image. It was a political statement, you know, where they said equality to a conservative is this about equal inputs. Everybody's going to get the same box to stand on. And then equality to a liberal is this is the cartoon. I'm not making a statement, but this is what the original cartoon was saying, that equality to a liberal is actually about giving people different boxes so that everyone can get the same view, right? And over the years, the image has changed. It's now been redrawn and reshared so that equality is about giving people the same inputs, whereas equity is about getting the same outcomes. And actually, I gave this workshop, I'm going to give you all a few words to think about, but one person put in the chat, what about if we just eliminated the fence completely, right? And so that is a word that that's about a word that I'm now bringing into all of my design conversations, which is just about abolition, okay? What are the things, you know, where are we identifying systems that just need to be abolished? Or, you know, like, and sometimes in our conversations about equity, and sometimes we're just trying to propose little incremental changes, but sometimes we have to completely reframe the way we ask these questions and say, well, okay, what do we have to completely abolish to make sure that we get to that fairness that we're talking about, you know? Comments about this, questions? Margaret, what was your question in your mind before you saw the image? Maybe the question no longer exists.
No, not a question. I don't look at equity, like for me, from my perspective, as equality of outcomes. And I feel that when we use that kind of language, then we end up in this sort of divisive, you know, the liberals, the neoliberals. I know liberal here is how you all define it, but neoliberals. So that's now people who are thinking about equality as a neutral concept. And it's about how can we be neutral in society. I see equity as a contextual concept, which is different from equality in this way. This is how I see it. Let me see if I could explain in my mind the difference, which I think if we explain it this way, then we might get less pushback. I see, you know, equality as being proffered as a neutral thing, a neutral concept, that everyone should have the same things, or you know, we should give everyone the same opportunities, you know, and that's fair. And it's difficult to say that that's not fair, but it is not fair when we think of the history, the social, geographical, cultural, or all the differences that people start off with, you know, at any point in time in society. And so equity is the concept which points to fairness, which takes into consideration, and I love how you put it, the obstacles the historical, political, economic, and cultural obstacles that exist in society. So both equality and equity are pointing toward fairness, but one concept sees all of us as the same and it's value neutral. And the other concept recognizes difference and recognizes the unique lived experience of each individual in history, in politics, in economics, and all of that. And I think if we start talking about it like that, then it's difficult for the conservatives to say, oh no, we shouldn't be fighting for equity. From a historical context, and you can trace historically how people have been disadvantaged, then, you know, if once you can do that, and there's a lot of workers where you're from in the US there, showing the historical marginalization and discrimination. And so I love how you addressed it by saying abolition. I think that's a very strong concept that I hadn't put together with equity before, but yeah, it's part of what, and the way you defined it is like how I see the work that we're trying to do. How do we dismantle the systems that create blockages and obstacles for a fair society? So both are going for the same thing, but one is actually looking at each of us as unique, historically and politically generated people, human beings. Yeah.
The thing is, we also have to counter myths of, well, like in the US, there's the myth of opportunity. And so like, that's why some groups have a hard time talking about equity, because, you know, there's that myth that, the myth of meritocracy, I suppose, you know, where people say, well, okay, if you work hard enough, you'll get anywhere, right? And, you know, that is like such a big story here in the US. And life is really, yes, there are some people who do really well in the US, right? But life is really hard for a lot of people, right? But, you know, you get those messages all the time that if you just work a little bit harder, you'll get. So, you know, I think that creates a lot of problems in this equity, equality conversation here. Ilza, you want to share what?
Ilza did a very interesting comment there. I'd love to hear her talk on that.
I didn't necessarily want to take up any airtime, but personally, and this is just my own sort of response, equity, you know, this is just, I think, a lot of semantics, and it depends very much on which tradition you're coming from. But of course, if we misunderstand, if we use words and we misunderstand them, that also creates a whole new layer of trouble. For me personally, and I think in the South African sort of tradition and jurisprudence tradition, equity never really had a lot of legs. I think it's maybe an American thing. And for us, we went through a very kind of profound process where we had to rethink our concept of equality. And it was in some way, I don't want to romanticize it, but in some way it was a co-design process, the creation of our new constitution. There was a lot of participation, a lot of community-based participation in that process. And people had to get their heads around this idea of Aristotelian equality, which is that as long as you treat people the same, but you can do that within certain categories. So as long as you treat all whites the same, then that's fine. But then, you know, Black people can still be discriminated against. And then it also had this notion of sameness that's also built into the Aristotelian understanding of the way Aristotle originally thought around equality, obviously within his own context. But we got quite a lot of our thinking from the Canadian system and their Charter of Rights and this idea of substantive equality, and to sort of give a reinterpretation to how you think about equality as very often very different treatment. And so our constitution makes specific provision for fair discrimination, discrimination that is fair. and that is there to serve a certain purpose, the transformation of our society, the redressing of wrongs, etc. So laws like affirmative action laws, or spending more in certain communities that are under-resourced, these things are considered, they're discriminatory in a sameness kind of but they meet a second requirement, which is the one of fairness.
Mhm.
And I personally like that we are more rigorous with how we use the term equality than to just grab another term like equity and then kind of, get so entangled in all that kind of language. And also personally for me, equity just sounds, it's got something about capitalism for me and equity. When I think about equities, I'm thinking about the business report on the newspaper that I don't understand, but I know they're busy, I'm almost used a bad word. They're busy thinking us over, if you know what I mean, with all their talk of equity this way and that way, equity and commodity and blah, 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 blah. So for me, there's a very economic sort of thing to do with the term equity. But I do think that this is a semantic-y type conversation, and one can go down the rabbit hole with it. And as well as that, if we're not clear, what William Stafford, the poet, said, if we're not, we've got to be careful in how we use words, because the darkness around us is deep. And if we start getting confused and we start misinterpreting, then that can also really sort of undermine our efforts.
Thank you. I mean, I love having conversations with people from different backgrounds because it just like open, I love the mind-blowing emoji in WhatsApp, and so I literally see myself as my head kind of exploding every time I talk with people and I get these new perspectives, so I definitely agree with you, Ilse, that equity, I think I started to try to do a Google usage search because I've been trying to work, I've been trying to write about this, and the word equity like this was not on my radar before a few years ago, and so that's why I was starting to do that kind of Google usage search to see, well, what has happened with the use of the word equity. And then I don't actually know how to do the Google usage search. I'll do it eventually. But I really enjoyed hearing about this perspective that you gave us on Aristotelian equality and substantive equality. When I moved to the US, I found that I started to hear the use of the word equity more than and I'm not sure if I heard it more because I moved place, or if I heard it more because the common usage of the term had changed. And then when as I said, I've been trying to write about equity, and every time I do these searches, yes, the capitalist equity concept comes up before this other kind of equity concept that we're talking about. So yeah, a lot of what you said kind of is aligned with my experiences around this. And I'm definitely going to look up Aristotelian equality and substantive equality much more. Evelyn, you want to pipe in with the quote that you heard?
Yeah, I found that a great quote because I always wonder, the people that are inside of privilege, which we can all be, right? Intersectionally, we all have maybe parts of our identity that are sitting on a side of privilege rather than oppressed. But it can seem, when you see certain measure being put in place, like the blocks in the picture, I found can give this reaction to the person that doesn't receive the blocks, like it's unfair because they don't see the privilege that they might be holding. So I always love that quote. And I liked what Lorna was bringing in of who decides those blocks? Like, who puts them there? From what perspective are they given? Giving people what they need. So, and then I get back to the co-designing. What we're talking about is listening actually to the people that are having lived experience and asking and amplifying those voices and those perspectives.
Yes. if I build on what Lorna is saying, I find myself getting kind of tripped up with, okay, is some, and I'm talking about the work that I do as a designer, you know, some is the approach really patriarchal, and is, you know, am I kind of taking on this benefactor role where I give people power, or, you know, I find myself I'm in perpetual existential crisis, actually, because I've started to try to change the way that I practice design, and life would be so much easier if I just said, you know, I'm just going to do things this way, and I'm going to give people power, and, you know, and I didn't have to think about it. But because, you know, I'm changing perspective, I'm always asking these questions, you know, about power, and starting to use these words like patriarchy and all of that in ordinary conversation. And I think that maybe there are other people who are also having these kinds of questions about the things that they're doing. And yes, that's pushing us towards fresh perspectives in this work, that almost this movement work or activism work that many of us end up being involved in. Margaret, who would you like to hear from in the chat? We have quite a few other comments in the chat.
Hey, let's just pipe up. Let's pipe up. We have Ilza, we have Lorna can't speak, we have Evelyn spoke, and Ilza spoke. I'm not sure there's anyone else piping up on this issue. Yeah.
All right, so let me go back then to some slides. Okay. Oops. All right, so some equity issues that we have in design in particular, and who knows if this also affects the fields that you're in. We have a lot of distance between the designers and the people that they are supposedly designing for. We have a lack of understanding of what people actually really need to live full and healthy lives. This is almost the same thing, lack of focus on people with these needs. We often use a deficit framing of issues rather than asset-based. You know, we're looking at people's problems, and, you know, there's a whole, we're trying to use new language in design that's not so problem focused, but some people, and we're still struggling, you know, because we're accustomed to finding problems and trying to solve them. You know, that's the way we talk in design. Very often there's a saviorism kind of mentality in the way that we do social design. We reinforce and perpetuate oppressive systems such as sexism, racism, white supremacy, classism, ageism, heteronormativity, ableism, etc. And then we focus on incremental change of oppressive systems rather than radical change. And this is a really, you guys maybe have less of this issue in law, but certainly in design, we often focus on very individual solutions that don't often take into account the systems, you know, like, so we might have an example of a way a designer might see a problem is like, we might, let's say we're designing a bus stop, for example. We might say, oh, I don't know what's the problem, why people don't use the bus stop. That's the way a design conversation might go in the design team, without seeing maybe the bigger systems that might prevent people from using a bus stop. Like maybe the bus, I don't know, this is not bigger system, bigger issue, right? Like maybe the bus stop hasn't been designed with covering so that people can be comfortable, or maybe it's impossible for people to walk to the bus stop, or, you know, so like we often focus on individuals and individual actions without seeing the bigger issues. And another issue in design is who defines the problem and why. You know, are the people involved in the issue saying this is a problem, right? And you might be seeing me actually struggling with my language because I am kind of constantly making the shift, you know, like I'll talk about, oh yeah, Julia says there is no bus. Yes, big issue. You know, I might say problem and then I have to pull myself back and say issue. because, so people see me kind of grappling with these things in my head as we work, right? Some words that I'm trying to build into my design practice, definitely equity, participation, liberation, emancipation, abolition. I've been trying to build these almost as design principles into the things that I do. And I might ask, I've asked other designers this kind of question: how might we include equity, emancipation, liberation, abolition in our design process to change the way the design conversations go? And so now is a good time to sprinkle in a quote. Eric Lewis says, if you want to change a story that justifies power and privilege, you must have goals, bold goals and specific steps. And one must be in a space where one can ask, what is a better way of doing this? And this is, again, another design question, how can we do something better all the time? And this is an image of Eric Liu, and he says, creating a space to dream about the future helps individuals to visualize and change their story. And then this will be a good segue into talking about futures. But anyone wants to give any closing comments on equity before we get into the future? No, people are good. All right.
I think if we discuss equity, we're discussing it we could do it for hours. Yeah. And do I jump in, do I not? But just to say that equity certainly is not just an American, it's not become live in the American experience just now. I mean, it's a huge area of law in the UK common law system and in common law territories. And it was about looking at, it was developed alongside the letter of the law, which says the law says A, B, C, and D, this is what everyone should get. And yes, it came from a paternalistic sort of approach where people said, but the law is not being applied fairly because we are all very different. And so Lord Chancellor, became the one who doled out what is equity. So the law did not allow for this outcome, but Lord Chancellor brought equity alongside the law. And through this development of the law of equity, you saw discretion being applied to meet the specific circumstances of human beings. And so it's a very, written about concept and considered concept, for hundreds of years. So, yeah, and so it is distinct from equality, and it's not something being used semantically to distinguish equality. Yeah.
Do you think the usage is different in different places? Like you see a different usage of the term in the US and the UK, or I don't know, other countries?
I think in common law countries, there tends to be a similarity in the usage of equity. I would have thought that it would have been similarly used in South Africa, but then no, because South Africa had to grapple very deeply with these issues in the law and had to legislate differently from other countries. But the US does have a similar tradition as the UK and common law countries. But again, because of I would think, the descendants of the slaves living with descendants of the slave owners, that unique historical context would have made it develop in the way, and you'd be lost in the arguments and the divisions about it as you've had, in it. But yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Well, I want the transcript of this this conversation. Okay, so let me go back into sharing. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the future and how we use this in design, right? So the first thing is that all design is speculative, right? Because once we're designing something, we are thinking about a future use or future context, so all design is speculative, and there's a specific area of design called speculative design, where people are moving beyond the way that we would normally design something for the future. Well, let me go back a little bit. Like if I'm designing, I have a phone next to me, right? If I'm designing this phone, I'm thinking about somebody who's going to use this phone in the future and what do they need. So that's what I mean when I say everything that we design is about the future, right? Because we are imagining future context. And then there is this area of speculative design that is going a little bit further, right? So this is a definition of design. To design is to devise courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And this is by Herbert Simon. Let me see if I have notes on who is Herbert Simon. I know who Herbert Simon is, but I can't actually tell you. He's like one of the theorists that we refer to. I believe this quote is from like the 60s or 70s. And it is, I think that what jumps out at you is that we are taking what's current, you know, what exists, and we're trying to think, okay, how do we make it better? So all design is about that, right? And this, I think, is an interesting quote by an unnamed individual. I believe this is from a book called Speculative Everything, right? So where typical design looks at small issues, speculative design, which is a really specific area in design research, you know, broadens the scope to tackle the biggest issues in society. So like really like wicked problems, and where the results of speculative design are not trying to create then objects that are functional or useful. It's that these results, they're trying to create objects that force us to think about problems differently. So the outcomes or outputs of speculative design might not be, in quotes, useful objects. They are things to make us reflect and think, okay? And in futures, maybe research, we talk about this cone of future possibilities, where many of us design for probable or projected futures. And it's interesting as an exercise to push people further, you know, to sometimes preposterous futures, impossible futures, to get people to expand the way that they think about a problem or an issue, right? So probable futures may take account of current trends that we may know now and are still likely to happen. And we might also think about, let's see, I'm reading off some notes, right? Plausible futures are less probable, but are still likely, they may still happen based on what we know currently, right? And we don't need elaborate plans for plausible futures. And, you know, so we can imagine this thing in the future, but we say it's plausible, you know, it's something that is likely to happen based on what we know. Possible futures, if you push it a little further out, they are not currently seen as probable or plausible, but a significant change in circumstances could still result in them happening. And we don't need a lot of planning as well. The lowest fidelity of planning is really required here, but it can be useful to identify possible futures that might stretch our thinking in a positive way or impact us negatively in momentous ways. And you know, one of the design activities that we're going to do in a bit pushes us in that direction, where we're thinking about, okay, what is something that could happen, but it's really negative, or what is something that could happen and it's really positive, right? And then preposterous futures are improbable, implausible, and currently impossible. They might easily be dismissed, but even thinking about these can be useful in provoking truly different thinking in a planning session. So, you know, one way to stretch your thinking, stretch the thinking of the people that you might be working with, is to get them to think in these like different kinds of time frames, moving from projected, probable, plausible, possible, and preposterous. All right. Okay, so I'm stopping a little bit to read some of the comments. Svea, would you like to, I don't know if this was a comment that I missed a little while. No, it is 10:32 by me. So yes, Svea, you want to talk about your comment in the chat?
Well, yeah, sorry, there's a typo. It's not I'm begging to ponder. I'm beginning. I should have said I'm beginning to reponder. In work that I do, there is the assumption that problems and solutions are not necessarily connected. Not that they're not connected, but they're not necessarily connected. And as I'm listening, I'm beginning to think again about what happens when you assume that problems and improvements or solutions are necessarily connected. And so other words that came into my mind, which I've written there, are things like non-rationality, non-linearity, counterintuitive. And I remember when I met design thinking, having a great deal of difficulty with the fact that people seem to need a problem to begin from or with, and that they couldn't begin with simply the notion of people are infinitely creative, and even if there's nothing wrong, people bring, people enjoy speculation, creativity, improvement. They don't have to have a problem in order to do that. So, so I suppose I suppose those are the things. It's not really a question. I'm sort of thinking about this all over again.
But that is a helpful proposition, because that's part of the identity crisis or existential crisis that a lot of designers have right now. Do we have to be looking at problems all the time, right? As part of the design research process, some people are proposing like alternative methods or, of just having the initial conversations to find the area of focus, which could then not be a problem, right? The conference that I was involved in last weekend, the track that I was involved in was actually about, well, it still included problem in the term, but so the name of the track was Alternative Problem Framing, and it was asking people to not start the design process with a problem, and then to share in their experiences what were they using as the prompt for their design process if it didn't start with a problem. Okay, and so we had some interesting papers and activities where, for example, one designer, it was a design education conference, and one educator said that she is starting all of her work just around the senses. So it's not necessarily about problems, but it is finding issues of focus or areas of focus based on people's sensorial experiences. And then she did this experiential workshop where we had to amplify our senses. And that was like really interesting. Again, mind-blowing. Someone else was starting with age as a prompt. Another person was starting with a different kind of concept, tools, technology, and something else, where we just had to think again, so people were forcing us to start the design process, not around problems, but around different kinds of issues. Edward, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to add on the design, co-design, I believe it's all about innovativeness. Because what you're describing, I think it's called innovative. For me, I'm coming from a point of an engineering. I'm an electrical engineer by profession, but I love laws, and I've been reading about law and things like that. So when we trying to design or to be innovative, it's about the people. So once we engage the people, we are going to get to know what is it that they want. Then you operate or design from that point of understanding of bottom-up approach. And the other thing that I've discovered is that I think most of the organizations and how we do things, we are operating from a traditional industrial age where it was designed between the thinkers and the doers. But I think this time in this 21st century, we need to engage even the people that are doing things on the ground floor. Let's put them into management, and management go to where the things are happening. I think that's where now we understand and properly design what actually people are looking for. Because design is not about techniques, I believe it's about the people. So once we understand what really people want, and then we can take it up from there. I think that's my contribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is about, yes, what people are interested in. And we have to learn then to listen to people. Svea, to build on your comment about imagination and playfulness, we had like 3 contributions in the workshop last week where people started with play. I mean, like actual play, and people, play and toys, and sending play materials to people's homes and having people make things. They were using that as the start of the design process rather than, again, a problem. So design is a new field, and it's interesting then to see the way we are all grappling with these issues, and then the kinds of directions that it's going now as we move forward, right? All right, I'm going to get back into the presentation because I want to get you all to a play space kind of soon, right? Oh, and my photos, your photos are in front of my presentation. So, okay. All right, I've moved. So I have a lot of theory on these. I'm not going to read out all of the theory. I'm kind of going to just skip through it. So this CUAR is Critical Utopian Action Research, which is a form of action research that has come out of a Scandinavian tradition, where, as it says here, it's been developed over the last 4 decades. The key terms are critical utopia and then action research. So it's a tradition that is asking people to critique the world around them, dream about utopia, and then through action, they're starting to move to respond to their critique, and when I found this in the literature, I thought, well, this is design, where people are, imagining what they want and then acting on it, and so I've used this as a grounding principle in a lot of the workshops that I've done, and then I'm going to introduce you all like hands-on to some of the way I've been doing this, right? Let's see, what do you need to hear from? So critical utopian action research. In these projects, participants collaboratively seek to understand their experiences in the context of wider societal and structural perspectives. And then the facilitator has to create a space where only critique is allowed and participants can easily and equally bring forward their critique. And then they're trying to create a space for social imagination, and they're going into brainstorming and just criticizing all the things that they're unsatisfied with under the workshop headline, right? So it's important here to create space for people to be critical. Very often people think that they cannot, their critiques aren't being heard, but in this kind of workshop, it is that you are consciously, and a government agency could be doing this, consciously creating space for people to be critical of something. And then the next step is to ask people, what is the utopia that they want? Okay, what is it that they dream about, right? So the core questions: how do we really want to live? How should we live? Not survive, but really live. These are the kinds of questions that are underlying this kind of research framework. And then the 3 core questions are really, really simple. What's wrong? Where do we want to go? And how will we get there? Which for me, again, is a design question. All right. Yes, and I see Julia had to take a break. Margaret, you could message me and let me know if you want, when you want everybody to take a break, okay? So what I've been trying to do is to connect these three questions with the way that I do design. I see that there's the overlap. And so, you know, consciously trying to create space for people to be critical, consciously trying to get people to dream about utopia and, you know, think about the future. And then again, consciously trying to get people to act. So it's not a passive kind of process, right? And this is to create a sense of agency for participants that I work with. And very often these are people who might sometimes feel disempowered in the design process anyway. Right, so let me see. So in the work that I did with some children, this was like the result, I suppose, of one of these kinds of workshops where the children had to be like very critical of their environment, or they had to interview other people and find out from other people what they thought was wrong. So this child had done some interviews with some people in her community, and the person was complaining about all of the litter in the community. And then the child designed a robot, which exists but didn't exist in this child's reality, right? It's like a Roomba or, you know, one of those kinds of vacuum cleaners, but for the city that the child drew, designed. So this robot would be able to go through the town for the Trinidadians or Trinbagonians in the room. The town is Maruga. And so this robot would go through Maruga and clean up the town, because the child was responding to what they heard the adults being critical of, right? And you see this child said, I'm going to connect it to Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Messenger. It was, for me, this was like a really, really fun process for the children and for me, right? This other child was responding to same activity. They interviewed somebody who was talking about, I want to go to church, but I don't want to have to wake up so early. And the child then designed Skype church, which, I mean, my mother today is only doing church via Zoom. So you know, this is so interesting that this child designed this like 3 or 4 years ago, and this is the reality today, that this church app would help them talk to other church people, view church while they were at home, and it would play church music for them. And okay, so that was that experience. A colleague of mine did the prototype using my method with some students in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, where there was, let's say, complete destruction in Puerto Rico, almost complete destruction in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And then my friend changed her design process, her design class, where the class now started with students being absolutely critical of Puerto Rico as it existed, and then proposing what are the new ideas, destruction, and say, we're going to move forward and say, what's the utopia that we want? And then what are the design solutions that we're going to create? And so they came up with some design solutions where they were thinking of flying power generators and solar smartphones and portable laser cutters and smart bridges and solar refrigerators and glasses that would help people change their perspective. So if they were looking at destruction, the glasses would change perspective and they could then see the potential of the place, and medical cyborgs. And then in that project, they had 2 phases. So they did the utopian kind of phase, and then they did another design phase after, where they actually went to things that maybe were more probable or more plausible after going to the more preposterous projects before, right? And so the other things that they designed were things like maybe toolkits to help people be ready for the hurricane, instructions for what people could do with the debris from the hurricane, and things that were a little bit more practical. So, ways that we can do this work, intentionally create dream space for people, allow people, or not allow, because that's, again, a kind of patriarchal word, give people space to be critical. Sometimes when people come into spaces, they are wary about how the critique will be received. And then maybe borrow from design pedagogies to facilitate experimentation. Like, a workshop that I did in New Orleans, we brought in a lot of these kind of crazy prototyping materials to help people talk about the innovation process that they were interested in. Some more slides of the way that we might do this, or we've done this, is I often give people like a time in the future. So this was a project that we did at Stanford, where students had to imagine the timeline and the kinds of changes they wanted to see at Stanford. So we worked on a whiteboard, and they then imagined where they wanted the place to be in 2050. And so this is how we brought the future into the project, where they imagined things, all of the things that would get them to 2050. In New Orleans, in New Orleans, I'm gonna give you all a break in like 2 seconds, right? No, not 2 seconds, 2 minutes. In New Orleans, we were doing some research around COVID, where we were sending materials to people's homes and then doing some workshops via Zoom, but where we were imagining the future. I'm gonna actually do one of these exercises with you all in a bit. This is what it will look like. So you'll recognize when you see the slide. With the city of Palo Alto in California, there was a workshop where we asked the city council members to imagine the city of Palo Alto in a specific year. And then by taking them into the future intentionally, what is it that they wanted, we could get them to talk about, okay, this is where we will be in this futuristic year. And, this is done in a playful way. So I don't know if anyone recognizes this image. Where might this be? You could either unmute or put it in the chat. Nobody recognizes. So this is actually Wakanda, right? And so, yeah, so, like in this kind of workshop, it's important to get like very playful, because people sometimes cannot imagine so far forward. Sometimes, yes, it's Marvel's Wakanda, and sometimes I'll show them a map and say where Wakanda is supposed to be, or, we have to be playful to get people to imagine beyond where they are thinking of in the present, right? So maybe the closing quote before the break. This is an activist in New Orleans called Stephanie McAnderson, who said, the most dangerous thing is when we cease to have space to dream. The work that we do takes us out of dream space. And she says in her own work, she has to be careful when she says something like, this can't happen. Sometimes people will come and bring an idea and says that this can't happen. And she has to consciously be making space for people, well, for herself to remember that everything can happen or anything can happen. And it's important to also create these spaces for other people in the work that we do. So I'm gonna stop sharing here, give everybody like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll actually try out some of these tools on a different platform, okay?
Okay, thanks, Leslie. I'm gonna press pause on the recording.
Right. Yay, so we're back. So now let's try some stuff. So I know some of you are on your computers. I know Dan was on a phone earlier on. We're gonna do, I'll share my screen to make it easy for the people who might have some difficulty in following on. And if you're on a computer, you should be able to get into this file, which is the file that I'm using. So I'm gonna be using an app called Mural, which I used in the last future law workshop that I did. I enjoy using these virtual whiteboarding apps, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. And because they've made collaboration very easy across geographies. So I'm going to share, I'm showing you now what the entire board will look like. And I'm going to be zooming in on a certain parts of the board. The board has a lot of little exercises. You could think of it as a kind of like tapas approach, where we'll be looking at a few of them and talking about them. And then we mightn't get through everything that's on this board today, okay? So now where am I gonna pull you to? And then if you are having trouble with anything on the board, you can always participate via chat. Where did my chat disappear? Oh my goodness. Okay, good. I'm gonna pull up my chat because I may ask you to do something on the board and you might not be able to type on the board, but you could put it into the chat, right? I'm just really showing you how you could be using these materials to work. So the first thing I'm going to share with you, we may not actually do it, but this is the kind of activity that I might start a workshop with, where I'm building in ways of getting people to use the technology in a light way. So the first activity that I often ask people to do is to take a push pin. Oh my goodness, it's not even working for me, so it might not work for you. It might be locked. Let's see. So take a push pin. No, it's not working. Oh, there's something in front of it, area and content. Okay, so take a push pin and drag it to the part of the world. Everything is giving me trouble. This is supposed to be behind. But take it and drag it to a part of the world where you are or you want to be, right? And the only reason that I do this is to get people to start moving things around the board, right? The problem that I have right now is that the map is in front, and I just admitted somebody. So the map is actually in our way. Let me see if okay, send it to the back. Right, good. So people can tell us either where they are or where they want to be. That's just a way of to get people familiar with the technology before we actually start doing stuff together. Next activity that I often ask people to do is to make a sticky note, because everything that we do on Mural, we're asking people to use sticky notes. So if you click twice on the board, a sticky note should come up, and then you can try typing into it just to see what's the process. So there are two ways of making sticky notes. You can just click twice, or you can come to this menu on the left. You'll see a square with a little triangle on it, and you can click there and you can pull a note out. So if you need sticky notes as we work, that's the way to do it. Or you can just type into the chat and someone can put whatever you want to put onto the sticky note in, right? I think somebody came in after I shared the link, so I'm gonna share the link again in the chat. Okay, so the first real activity, is it view only for you?
Yeah, it's fair.
So you guys can't, okay, let me share a different link.
You need to make us co-host or something, I don't know.
No, it is the wrong link, sorry, yes. So copy link, try this other link and see if it works. Can you edit now?
Getting there.
Okay. So I'll look for a thumbs up from Alyssa. Yeah, Alyssa's like, why me? All right. Yes, I'm seeing push pins moving around, and if you could try making a post-it note, that'd be great. And if it's not okay, good, it works now. All right. So the last time we had a conversation, because you all will have access to these boards, I don't take down these boards. So if you want to come back to this, you can. Margaret can email out the link. These were the slides for the last future law workshop that I did. And the last workshop that we did, we were talking about justice and different frames, different ways we could use justice design process. So I'm bringing you over. We just talked about the corner future possibilities. I'm sharing with you now. I think I can bring everyone to me. Let's see. I'm going to ask you to follow me. And then I'll summon everyone here to where I am. In this design workshop that we did in Tulane, we actually gave people a scenario, all right? Where we told them we're in 2030 and COVID has been eradicated, yay, right? What would you go back and tell people in 2019, December 2019, just before the pandemic? What would you tell people so that they could prepare better? You know, what would you tell people on an individual level, an organizational level, a governmental level, health services? Woulda, coulda, shoulda, all right? And actually there's no real difference between the woulda, coulda, shoulda. But we want you then, if you just click on any one of these post-it notes, you can start to type in what is something that you would have told somebody in December 2019, just before the pandemic, to help them prepare better for today. And so I'll give you all a few seconds to type in some stuff to help you think about. So here we're using the future, where we're in 2030, the pandemic no longer exists. And we're then using the memory, using the experience of being in the future to get people to think about what they would change what they would have told someone in the past, right? So I'm gonna give you all a little bit of headspace to type some stuff in, and then we'll debrief that a little bit. And normally I would play some music in the background, and I forgot to cue up some music for that. I'll just give you like 30 seconds again, and then we could read one or two people's ideas. Right, we're starting to stuffing it, right? So one person says, I would support teachers to migrate to online. Another person said, I would tell people to get a computer with a great new webcam, move somewhere you want to live for a year, make sure there's outdoor space or plants. Keep interacting with people on multiple levels. The art of conversation will be more needed and more necessary than ever. Let's see, we have anything else here? Learn to be unafraid. Establish rhythm rather than routine. So we have interesting suggestions from people coming in. Build your immune system, get healthy, be considerate, have less inequality. And so what we did with this activity, so this is a real activity that we use from some research at Tulane, where we were trying to get people to talk about their experience of the pandemic. We're doing, I guess, action research with the community. We're trying to create what are called patient-centered outcomes in research. But we did not want to go into this research as traditional researchers, just asking people ordinary questions, okay? So we created this elaborate scenario, and we did this virtually on Zoom, where, you know, yes, we had music playing in the background. The music we had playing in the background was the Black Panther theme song. And I think myself and the other researcher, who's a doctor of public health, we maybe had on like costumes and stuff like that. But we wanted to create a space where people wanted to contribute and where people would give us a lot of feedback on where they felt there were problems with maybe where they felt there were issues or problems within the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, we're not post-pandemic yet, but and I use that bad word again. I said, I wonder what happened there. Your internet went down for a second. Okay, all right, good, yes. So we were able to use then this as a kind of way of getting people to talk in a non-academic or non-research kind of framework. So in a kind of playful setting, we were starting to able to see where are people's interests and priorities and concerns in the work, in the topic area that we were interested in. I gave you all a lot. Anyone wants to break this talk shop with some feedback, comments? Could you use this kind of approach in what you're doing? And then I'll move you all to another little exercise. This is just kind of way out there. All right, so I'm gonna move you all to something else. So this again is a question that a type of design question that we ask people all the time. If you could design, if you could come up with any kind of device, product, or policy based on your knowledge of past, present, and future of the pandemic, what would you design? Address one of the couldas, shouldas, or wouldas in your design. You can design more than one solution and place your design idea or concept on a sticky note in one of the boxes below, or you can also draw in the box. So I guess what we could do, I know that, let me see, I'm reading. Yes, there's a bit of a struggle sometimes with the technology. And the group that we did this with, just to give you a little bit more of a backstory. So we did this with older people in New Orleans, but we worked with them maybe for about like 4 or 5 sessions. So by the time they did this session, they were surprisingly comfortable with mural and technology. And then we had figured out ways and strategies of making sure that even the people who weren't comfortable with the technology were able to participate, right? So thank you for coming, Kate. Yes. And so the kind of question that we might ask here, if we took one of the issues I'll draw on this issue here with have more ordinary people reporting in the media, right? If we take that and we say that that's the design issue that we want to focus on, I'm going to ask people to think of what could be a way that we could address that issue of who is reporting in the media. And you all could brainstorm in the text if you want, or you could just unmute and say, well, what are some ways that we could have gone back to 2019 and design a different way, a different kind of reporting system for COVID. Now that we know now that we're in 2030 and we know what we know, if we go back to 2019 and we're planning for the chaos of 2020 and 2021, what would we add to the reporting system so that there are more ordinary people, there's more citizen reporting of the pandemic? Anyone wants to suggest what could be a way of changing up the reporting system? I'm pushing you all into a difficult space at this hour of the afternoon. Margaret, I'm going to pick on you. Oh, I see Svea turn on her camera. If you turn on your camera, that means you're ready to say something, right?
I'm happy to say anything that comes into my head. Is to have an Instagram account. Oh, I have an Instagram account which is, or something like that, where people can post just photographs of what I am doing to manage.
Yes, yes. What you mean, like, what are they doing to cope with the pandemic?
Oh,
yes,
that's right. But just
photos.
A picture says 1,000 words.
Yes, yes, nice. Anyone else wants to come in with a design idea to get more citizen reporting or citizen accounts of their pandemic experience? Anybody? I'm going to ask Alyssa. I'm going to ask you because your camera's on.
I was thinking maybe a Wikipedia page as a pandemic citizen response Wikipedia page.
Okay, yes, definitely. And the nice thing about a wiki is that the wiki can be corrected, you know, so like maybe if we have people within a community. So I'm now adding to your design. So like a wiki page for a specific community where people are reporting what's going on in the community. And so if someone else sees maybe the incorrect report, they can go in and they can edit it. But yes, it can become a place where people are coming for the local information.
Yeah, and as you say, it can be edited, then the idea of resources comes into play, because I remember that initial shortage and the procurement challenges at the start. So maybe either on that page or linked to some way of facilitating procurement. At this point, I will toss the potato in Margaret's direction because procurement or not.
And actually, I have to apologize. When I said neighborhood, maybe I was reading Saswati's idea and bringing then Saswati's idea in as about the neighborhood. So you see how the co-design process happens, you know, where we're all putting our little 2 cents in. Margaret, you want to add something to the procurement wiki?
No, I don't. I didn't understand. For me, I didn't understand what the challenge was. We wanted more citizen reporting during the earlier stages of the pandemic.
Yes, actually that was the initial prompt. And sometimes the prompt kind of goes off and we kind of let it, right? But I guess.
Because I think there was a lot of great use of technology, I don't know, during the early stages of the pandemic to facilitate hearing from, and we have the technology, so I'm not sure that's something I would have put somewhere. I'm sorry. So
that's fine. That's fine.
I get stuck there. So I'm like, but we had it. Was this a problem? Do we really need to reinvent it? When we did have Instagram, we did have people doing websites that assisted with getting PPE where they needed to get to, and citizen reporting all over the world, which actually helped us understand better what was going on all over the world, because mainstream media was not really letting on fully. And we were getting, pictures from and reports from Wuhan and everywhere. So yeah, sorry. So
I guess what I would
thinking about the issue and haven't.
But one thing I might do to build on your perspective is I might then ask, where was it being done very well? Because it might have been being done like really well in a specific place. And then maybe I would again go back to 2019 and say, well, okay, can we make this happen well in a lot of places? Can we amplify then the way it was done really well informally in X place and make that part of a bigger policy in Y place or something like that, right? I see Julia's hand.
Yeah, I like this idea, but as Margaret said, a lot of it existed. What is a problem for me is that if we'd reported from prisons or care homes or universities or schools, then we would have known very quickly that there was a problem, and also how to solve some of the problems that people were experiencing. So where I was in the December, before COVID hit anywhere, all the school children were sick, all of them. And so were the university, and so was I. So it was really obvious that something strange was happening. They were just asking the wrong people.
Again, I think that there's like what you just said about the prison. So like, maybe that's the thing that could go into the yellow boxes where you say, well, what could have been done differently? It could be something like, I would have paid attention to the fact that all the school children were sick, or to the fact that there was no information in the prisons, or, something like that, and bring that into the design process, bring that into the, created then another policy around that gap that existed earlier on, right? I guess we would need a longer process though, because this would be a slower process where we're talking through all of this. We would see that some things have already been done, and we might say, well, okay, how can we build on what was already done and share that practice in other places, right?
But still, I know that's true, Lesley-Ann, but there's still no word from prisons, and people keep saying to me they don't know who's dead. They don't know who's dying. They don't know anybody who's dead. But there are some places where there are lots of people who are dead, and it really would be useful to report from them.
So what could be the policy that is then created as a result of this gap that we've identified?
Open communication for people who are in prison, some kind of unique, uncensored method of communicating with the outside world.
Right. And so as part of the design process, what we would do is we take that issue that you have highlighted through this conversation, and then we would go through a brainstorming process around that one issue, where we are then, you've proposed one idea, but in the design process, then we would try to propose many, 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 many ideas afterwards. So you've highlighted an issue through this conversation, and then we can create an area of focus around that, right? All right, so I want to take you all to another type of design activity that we do that also takes people to the future, where we use these positive and negative headlines. So the instructions are, and then we could vary them slightly if we want, but what would the future headline look like in 2030 in response to one of the concerns of the previous activity? So if we stay where we are with communication from prisons, what's a positive version of the headline in 2030? The problem has been eliminated. And what is a negative version of the headline the problem has amplified, okay? So I'd like each of you then to think about, if we are in 2030, we no longer have a problem with communications from prison, you know, or the lack of communication that we're receiving from prison, then, oh, well, maybe that's the headline in 2030, prisons have been abolished, right? You know, so I want you to think a little bit about 2030 and see, well, what does the headline look like? What's a positive headline? So Julia has given us one positive headline, right? And then I want you to also think of the opposite. What's a negative headline from 2030? And then we will discuss. So either you can put it in the chat or you can put it on a sticky note. And I'm actually gonna create two headlines from what Julia put in. And then the negative version of the headline, the problem still exists. The problem is amplified. What's the terrible headline? All right, we have a few things coming in. Okay, so I'm gonna start reading some of these headlines, right? So I'll reread the ones that I had started off with. Prisons have been abolished. Yay, this is 2030. Another version of this headline, the last prisoner on the planet has been released and the prison system no longer exists. Another headline, legislation now includes homeschooling as legitimate. Then another headline we have here is new rehabilitation system for prisoners integrated into community, I think maybe the last word has a typo, but yes, so we have a new rehabilitation system for prisoners in 2030. And some of the negative headlines, more parents prosecuted for homeschooling, 70% of the population of Raleigh, I had typed more and maybe it's gone. 70% of the population of Raleigh has been incarcerated since there's no communication from prison. And the idea here though is that we are trying to imagine the extreme positive results of whatever area we're focusing on, and then the extreme negative issue when this issue has already been addressed, okay? And so this is again another way that we worked in actually using these kinds of design methods, right? So this kind of future headline, and I see someone else is typing in a headline and I'm anxiously awaiting human rights, something. Would love to see where that headline goes. Human rights lawyer said, who's typing it? You want to just say it? Okay, we're not sure.
Yeah, that's
yes,
me. Sorry.
Dan, is that you? What are you typing in?
It's because of fat finger syndrome. I can't do it on the phone. I just wanted to say human rights lawyers prosecuted for wasting court time or something like that.
All right. Yes.
Sorry, to use a better legal term, for unmeritorious claims.
Okay, so in 2030, now we have a new thing with lawyers being prosecuted, etc. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, wonderful. So we've had this. I know this is a really, really short time to think. I want to hear from you. What are your initial thoughts? I'm gonna actually stop sharing for a bit, right? What are your initial thoughts about like using these kind of maybe playful or preposterous kind of scenarios? So the first one we did, we sent people to the future. Let me look back on our mural. We sent people to the future that asked them to talk to people in the past. The second one, we actually talked about designing something in the future. So we came up with some ideas. We got people talking about a wiki page. We got people talking about reporting from prison, care homes, and schools. And that gave us focus for this third activity, which is about like positive and negative headlines. And the headlines are still coming in. Personally, it's an activity that I really enjoy, getting people to create that headline thing. We normally, of course, take more time, but I'd love to get some response from you about how do you think you could use those kinds of activities? Do you think you can push people that you're working with to think about the future in their work, and just a general like debrief among you?
Yeah, I appreciate the play aspect. I find it's, you know, when you frame it in that way, it feels less, there's more possibility in it. And yeah, the headlines exercise I feel slightly called out because I use that personally. Usually to stop myself from doing something that might be slightly foolish. I'm like, Alyssa, how is this gonna look as a headline? I mean, really. So to frame it as a preposterous future that might be good is really yeah, that's a good reframe. I don't know if it's I need to also balance that out. Yeah. So thank you for that.
So how did you get to that? You read that somewhere, or you just came up with that and you're like, what would this look like as a headline?
I came up with that because I love adrenaline, and my notion of what is actually dangerous is if there's no industrial fire or nothing is exploding actively, my sense of danger is not active. So sometimes I have to ask myself, it's something I just started doing spontaneously. I would ask myself as a headline, how is this going to look? You know, former operator found, I don't know, you know, I
like that. And I would challenge you to think about both frames, you know, like how will it look? And then, and the other, how will it look like? Oh my goodness, former operator, you know, analyze both the positive and negative frames, you know, if, I'm talking in problem language, you know, X problem has been solved, yay. And then X issue has been amplified. Oh my goodness, what's next? You know, as a framing of the conversation, I think is like a really interesting kind of starting place that yes, you can go in these two different directions and you can design the way that you get to the direction that you want, right? I don't want to monopolize the talk at this point yet. So I'd love to know if other people could give like their comments, feedbacks, but even how do you think you might be able to use futuring in the work that you're doing now? Yes, Margaret.
Yeah, I think it's cool. And I think I've always thought of these kinds of tools as something that we could use in the entrepreneur space to solve problems and think like that. But, you know, the question you asked, you know, in the work that you do, how could this help? And I started thinking about public procurement and social value procurement and innovation-oriented procurement. And the way we currently approach it at the organizational level is, if we want to become innovative, we look to the market to help us to provide the solution. So we basically put the problem out to the market and we wait for the suppliers to come up with many different solutions. These kinds of tools, I mean, it just struck me, you know, as a consultant working with public sector companies or private who are trying to be more innovative about their procurement, they could use these tools in-house, where they're starting to say, well, do we really need this specific thing that we're going out for? Is there another way we could think about what we need and use, you know, on complex procurements, on procurements that really huge bottom line? Is there a different way we can think about it? Yeah, and then, so yeah, that's what came to me, that these exercises could stimulate innovation in procurement, not just looking to it from the market, but in an organization's strategic marketing and strategic meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are organizations that are using future scenario planning, transformative future scenario planning, and to have discussions, you know, and so it's like almost like bringing in this design element is another way of just having these future conversations in a different way. Lorna asks, maybe these games can work well when people feel changes within their power, even if preposterous. I wonder if change they envisage is outside of their sphere of power. Might it entrench a sense of powerlessness? And this is something that I've been struggling with having conversations about, doing activities around for a little while. You know, does this empower or create that sense of hopelessness? I'm still in the camp of thinking that it is more in the empowerment space. And I think it depends on the population that you're working with, right? Because there are some people who will create the change regardless of whether in theory they have the power to or not, you know. And so when I'm thinking of the empowerment space, I think of people, I think of like activists who are, you know, grassroots activists who are saying, okay, this is the change that we want, and then, you know, galvanizing the momentum behind a movement. And then maybe eventually the people with more power will get onto their, you know, the change that they're trying to promote gets onto the agenda or radar of people who in theory have more power. But it's really that the spark started at the grassroots, you know, and I don't know enough history to say if these examples that I'm going to create, if that's really how the change happens. But, you know, a lot of us in this kind of space, we talk about things like the abolition of slavery, or we talk about gay rights, the marriage rights for gay people, or, you know, that somebody had to say, well, okay, this change needs to happen. And we do not think that the spark for the change would have started with the people with the power. The spark for the change, this is the way we talk about it, but this might be urban legend on our part, you know, people who are using this kind of, doing this kind of work, that we think that the change would have started with the people who might be perceived as not having power, and then they would have galvanized enough momentum behind the cause to finally get the people with more power to have the cause on their radar, right? But y'all might know more of the historical context behind those changes anyway. Svea, what are your thoughts, comments about how do you think this, is this just crazy stuff that wouldn't work in the work that you're doing, or
The answer to that is simple. Yeah, it can work. It does work because I use it. I was thinking about something a bit different, but just a quick comment is, I think with mural, although it can be a little bit excluding initially if people are not, if they're not aware about like being able to size things themselves and all the rest of it. But at the same time, you know, it's always this and that. Also, I found that people jump in and help one another, which is also quite extraordinary, which is lovely. But what I think for me, the power is that everyone can be busy at the same time. Mostly people get drawn into logging their own thoughts, so they are less listening to who has said what and how shall I say my thing, because they actually just get on with saying, especially if there's a time pressure to it, you know, in the next 2 minutes do this or that. So I found that also very interesting. I've had lots of comments from people saying, thank goodness I can just put my own individual thoughts down and I don't have to do all this groupie stuff all the time, which is quite interesting. The question that I do have though, because I haven't explored it, so if anyone has, I'd be interested, is whether there is a pictograph or some sort of version, because we're assuming everyone can read and write, and that isn't true. So just by the fact that we use something like mural with words, etc., excludes a whole group of people. And I'm not concerned about the electronics because I think, you know, that's another whole story, and mobile phones. But I'm really interested. That's what I've been thinking of a lot. We've got a lawyer here who's been doing a lot of cartoon contracts. So everything is done in drawing form. And that's been very interesting. So I've been thinking about, is there a mural version, which is a pictograph or pictogram storyboarding, where people can actually draw their ideas? What would it look like, etc., etc. So that's a question. And then I want to go back right to the beginning. Is I found it very interesting earlier. I was very struck by the way that we use the word we, as if we include everyone in the whole globe with the word we, and we don't. And so I'm very intrigued by the fact that when we now work online, I'm doing it right at the minute. I'm thinking to myself, I need to be much more cautious about assuming that my world is everyone's world. And that in fact, when I say whatever I say, that doesn't mean that that necessarily is true for everyone else. And it didn't used to be like that, because you used to work with a much smaller audience when you were on site, even when people flew around internationally. It was the topic so people were shared ideas around topic. So I've got lots of ideas buzzing in my head, but my response to your question is yes, no, this works, and I use it a lot. I've also started using it with some children, and they've come up with very interesting other ways of being able to use some of these tools.
Yeah, you've given us a lot of stuff. So I mean, like, with regard to the many different ways of communicating, right? You know, that's something that's like a co-design principle, you know, that you should be allowing many different ways of representation. So for example, you know, some activities you might ask people to write, but you will also ask people to draw, or you'll ask people to act. You'll, you know, so that as we do the work, we should be trying to incorporate many different ways of communicating. The pandemic, by pushing us all online, has created some new challenges, but also has created new opportunities. So, you know, like in some of the workshops that I would have done pre-pandemic, we might be doing, for example, a lot of movement. I used to work with a dance professor at, I spent a year at Stanford, and there was a lot of dance in the design program, you know, and that's how I started using music in the background and things like that. But actually, so some of the access, for example, that the pandemic has created is, over the last year, I've had like 2 hearing impaired participants involved in many, many, many workshops. You know, they were coming to the same workshops that I was doing over time. And that then forced me and the team that was organizing the workshops, forced us to think about, okay, how are we creating different types of interaction so that all of the participants can give their involvement and their feedback. So if you are designing a workshop, I would definitely recommend that there are many different types of interactions and different ways of getting information. Something else I wanted to respond to as you were speaking. So there are critiques about design and design thinking. There are people who talk about the good, and so some of the good is that, oh right, you were talking about the pictographs. Mural has pictograms in it, and so sometimes when people set up a mural board, they will set it up with many like emojis so that people can pull the emoji on to represent how they're feeling. And then mural also allows you to draw. So, I know that we have some like pen marks on the mural board, which are accidental, but you can actually create a mural board with space for people to draw. And, sometimes I'll do that in classes that I teach, where I'll ask everyone to draw again, but emphasizing to everyone at the start that we'll all draw like 3-year-olds on mural because of the technology. And that's actually good because it kind of levels the playing field, and people actually feel a little bit more comfortable drawing. Or, very often we're trying to just create, again, multiple ways of sharing at the same time. So some people might draw on mural, but some people are just going to draw at home and then share their photograph. If you are the facilitator, you can take a screenshot. Now we're getting into like technical stuff, but you can take a shot of what the person has drawn and then you can upload it to mural, or they could text the picture to somebody and can communicate. Someone else can upload it, right? I'll share another activity that we did in that same research project with Tulane, where we asked people to come to the workshop. We were using photo voice, but like a digital photo voice. So we asked people to come to workshops with photographs. That entire research project was about the pandemic. So people had to photograph how their homes had changed because of the pandemic, and then either email us the photographs before, WhatsApp us the photographs, and then we put the photographs onto the mural board and then ask people to discuss around that, So our research aim in that project was really to get people talking. We weren't trying to get to a design outcome, but we were trying to use different design methods to get people to discuss or talk about their experience of the pandemic with people in public health. And then the public health officials would decide, okay, well, actually, they didn't decide. The public health officials would collect the concerns of the people who were involved in the research, and then we would take that back to the same people, and then they had to create priorities and decide where the public health research would go next. That was what the whole project was about. So that's taking you a little bit off topic, right? But yes, I know we kind of come into the end of the workshop now, right? So I'm going to make a wrap-up statement and then again leave it over to you if anyone wants to talk anymore, right? So I mean, over the last couple of hours, really what I was trying to do is get you to think about co-creation, equity, and the futures, and then show you some practical ways that I've been trying to do this in the work that I'm doing. I thank you for the kinds of conversations that we had, and I hope that you were able to get something from this that maybe you can apply into your practice, or even if the questions that came up might make you again modify your practice. I'd be interested in hearing later on how you take this forward, right? And so if anyone wants to give any closing comments, please feel free.
Yeah, it was incredible. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to give any closing comments to Lesley, to all of us? Yeah, Dan.
I just wanted to say, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, by the way. It was incredible, especially the playful aspects of it. And that's something I just wanted to comment on really. I've just realized how dark it is in this room. Sorry.
I'm wondering if you're in some coffin.
You were talking. Yeah, I look like witness protection.
I thought you were in a vehicle, actually.
A vehicle. That makes more sense. Yeah, I was just gonna say in relation, like what the last game made me think of about like ideas that you can have of how you want society to be seen, or what change you want to have. And you were also like talking about, you know, historical examples of when this might come into play, and the abolition of slavery was mentioned. And something which came to my mind was, you know, during the abolition movement in the late 18th, early 19th century, I think it was 1807, slavery was abolished. There was quite a lot of work within the artistic sector. There was like William Blake, for example, who was quite a poor guy, working class guy, and he had an alternative vision for the Enlightenment, which was basically based upon this concept that freedom is in the imagination. And the Enlightenment at the time was, you know, it was taken up of rational scientists who were basically against this. They wanted to just operate with reason and logic. To be able to dream. And one thing that I found interesting was that William Blake, he was not just a poet, but he was actually an artist. And that sort of coincides with what we were talking about as creating an image in which can maybe be instrumental in change. And one of his books with poems, which he did a lot of art, was Visions of the Daughters of Gideon, which was a very thought-provoking piece of work which showed the brutality of slavery. But there was also a lot of imagery about the shortcomings of the abolitionist movement at the time in Parliament, and actually that they didn't have enough teeth, and they were a little bit too lenient in the assurances that people in the slave industry wanted, and actually that was taken away from the abolitionist movement. So his paintings and his writings, which all came from the imagination and which everybody could see because it was a drawing, you didn't have to be literate to be able to understand it, was really instrumental in sort of reforming the abolitionist movement to sort of shine a mirror on them to see what their shortcomings were. So I just wanted to say that, you know, that for me was the example which spoke out as, you know, proof that these things in the imagination come from the people without power, and do have the potential to actually manifest into something which leads to structural change.
That is a wonderful example. I mean, I just wrote this down. I'm like, okay, we're gonna look this up now, right? Some slides that I didn't put in are some slides around Afrofuturism. And there are people who talk about Afrofuturism, again, like connecting it to slavery, you know, and that whole thing of needing to be able to dream about a future that is beautiful and wonderful and possible, and regardless of how much power you have, you know. So I don't think that change is about who has power like that. You know, I think that we have to dream about the thing that we have. And again, something else that I left out is like a definition of liberatory practice, or, you know, but people who, again, in Freya, and, you know, there's that conversation about liberation being something in the mind, you know. And so if you have that kind of liberatory outlook, you cannot be controlled, right? You might not have the kind of power that other people think that you have, but it's that liberatory mindset that allows you to think that that kind of change is possible, and the ordinary common people can work at making that change happen.
Exactly, yeah.
Margaret, I'll be quiet now.
Oh God, oh, please don't. You know, kind of Garvey-esque. Bob Marley, you know, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Does anyone else want to share any of their thoughts and feedback? I see we have quite a few comments from people who left, people saying that the class was phenomenal, people saying that they loved it, and so grateful for it. Savia has shared some comments. I don't know if Savia wants to say it out loud. No, so Savia is saying that she'd like to see how it flowed across the whole process, flowed across the mural board. And yeah, if no one else has, does anyone else have anything left to say before I say final words? Yes, Savia.
Well, I would like to say a big appreciation, because I am not always infused with enthusiasm at the thought of spending Saturday afternoon exercising my mind and my spirit. But what happens is that my heart and my spirit are always nourished by these. So I want to say thank you for organizing, doing all of what it takes to get this all together. And yeah, each one that I've been to, including this afternoon, I always know that I leave a somewhat better person. So thank you.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you, first of all, for the richness of the discussions today. It was really enjoyable to participate and to learn from everyone in the room. I thought this was a really incredible session, Leslie, and thank you. And it just makes me feel that what you do is so applicable in so many different spheres. And for me today, I know it might seem passe to you all. Maybe people are not, a lot of people don't think procurement is sexy, but I think procurement is like everything, right? Like if only we can see that it is, but I can see these tools being used in the procurement room to help us procure better. And yes, it's being done at an organizational level, people thinking about futures, but not at the procurement level. And the procurement level is so strategic and so important. And we've been looking for how do we include more community involvement in how we procure. In the UK, we just passed an act, well, not just 2013, but we're now really getting into implementing it, social value procurement, mandating that we think about stakeholders every time we procure. These tools that design thinking has produced can really help in that space. So I'm leaving today very excited that maybe next year when I finish this, what I'm doing, trying to finish this, right? I may reach out to you and because there may be some consulting work when I convince a client to say, no, take this seriously. Let's rethink the whole procurement process, the way we do it and the way we engage with community and all of that. So I'm excited about what you've shared, and I'm really grateful, Leslie, for the way you share as well and how real you make it, and your commitment as well to sharing with us your sources, where it comes from, how we can learn more. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. My computer has been in a mess for this entire session, so I've dropped in and out. I couldn't really get into Mural and do it properly. And also, I can't even get into Typeform to share with you the link for the feedback, but I will send an email to everyone who's attended so that you can give your feedback. I'll try to do it this evening because I'd like you to give your feedback about Leslie and this masterclass as soon when it's fresh. So lots of love, guys. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully all of you join us for Alyssa's masterclass before the end of the month. That is going to be insane, I think, right? Based on the discussions we've had, and it's all that we can do. We need to bring ourselves fully to this thing, and that breath work is all that Alyssa has been teaching me about it. I mean, it's key, and I know y'all, a lot of y'all understand that. But yeah, so looking forward to seeing you all before the end of the month. So thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Julia, Savia. Dan, thanks for plugging in. Great to see you. And great.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to your comments and your contributions. I loved how you closed it all off there for us. how you
Yeah.
tied everything together and you gave us the historical and context. And brilliant.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thanks, Makina, not seeing who you, but it was a pleasure having you all.
Yes.